The effective use of bombers and Axis and allies can be the difference between victory and defeat. In this video, we're going to break them down so that you'll be ready to darken the skies of your enemy's capital in your next game. Let's make it hot. Welcome to Board Game Nation. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching. Today we're bringing you part 2 of our 3-part series focused on all things air combat. In part 1, we broke down fighters. If you want to check out that video, we'll have a link at the end of this one. Today we're covering bombers and strategic bombing raids. And in part 3, we'll be covering the dreaded anti-aircraft artillery. In this video, we're going to get you the basic stats for bombers and how you can use their special ability to crush the economy of your opponent. We'll also be covering an optional rule that's printed in the 1942 2nd edition rulebook regarding escorts and interceptors. One quick thing, if you're brand new to Axis and Allies, this video may not be for you. This video is going to assume that you're comfortable with the basic mechanics of combat for Axis and Allies and, well, Axis and Allies in general. If that's not you, you need to head over to our complete how to play video linked in the card above. It'll take you through the game from the very top, or you can jump around using the chapter guide in the description. This video series is for folks looking for rules clarifications and examples specifically about air combat. Overall, we'll be focusing on 1942 2nd edition, but the rules for bombers and strategic bombing raids have changed a number of times over the life of the game. The information in this video is a great place to start for any version, but you're going to want to check the rules for the version you're playing to check for variations. If you want to look at the rulebook for just about any version of Axis and Allies, go to axisandallies.org. The link's in the description. They've got tons of resources for, well, every level of player and every version of Axis and Allies. Before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, please take a second and subscribe to the channel. Thanks. All right, here we go. Let's look at the basic stats for the bomber. While bombers cost 12 IPCs and have a total movement of 6, it scores a hit on any roll of 4 or less when attacking. But the big downside is that bombers can only defend on the roll of a 1. Special ability, bombers have an attack called strategic bombing raids. With this attack, bombers can make bombing raids on industrial complexes while ignoring any other hostile units that might be in that same territory. As we talked about in part 1, air units can't take control of a territory. They must split their movement between combat and non-combat movement. Bombers have to take off from and land in territories that were friendly at the start of their turn. Also, unless you're playing some kind of weird Doolittle raid house rule, bombers can't land on carriers. Bombers can make a special attack called a strategic bombing raid. This attack targets an enemy industrial complex and allows the attacker to ignore any other units that might be in the area. Here's how it works. During the combat move phase, the attacker can declare that they're performing a strategic bombing raid on a complex and move a bomber into that territory. That bomber will ignore any other enemy units, but it doesn't just get a free shot. Industrial complexes have a type of built-in anti-aircraft defense, so before the bombers attack, the defender rolls 1 die for each attacking bomber, however many there might be. And for each 1 that they roll, a bomber is shot down. The unit is removed from the board and will not get to fire. And the surviving bombers go ahead with the run and hit the target. The attacker then rolls for damage. While the complex can never be destroyed, it can be severely damaged. For each bomber that made it through, the attacker will roll 1 die. The dice total of that roll will be the amount of damage done to the complex. The defender places chips under the damaged complex to track the damage. A complex can be assigned damage points equal to twice the IPC value of the territory that it occupies. Wait, how does damage affect an industrial complex? We know that each complex's maximum production per turn is equal to the IPC value of the territory that it's in. So Italy has an IPC value of 3. So when it's undamaged, it can produce 3 units per turn. Each point of damage from a strategic bombing raid reduces the production capability of that complex by 1. Meaning if the complex in Italy has 1 point of damage, it can only produce 2 units per turn. And if it has 3 or more points of damage, it can't produce any units at all. Players can choose to repair damage to complexes during the purchase units phase of their turn by paying 1 IPC per point of damage to the bank. Once the repairs are paid for, they're effective immediately. Players can mobilize new units on that turn based on the repairs that have been completed during that turn's purchase units phase. Let's head to the map and I'll show you a few examples. It's time for the Russian combat move, and they've got a stack of bombers in the Ukraine and in the Caucasus. Okay, yeah, I know, but when else are you going to see a stack of Russian bombers? Plus, I like the pieces. They're huge. The Russians want to destroy the economic power of the Germans by attacking the industrial complexes in Italy and Germany. You can see that Germany has an IPC value of 10. That means that the complex in Germany can take up to 20 points of damage. And Italy has a value of 3 IPCs, so it can take up to 6 points. The Russians want to try to do the maximum damage to the German complexes. They send 2 bombers to hit the complex in Italy and 3 to hit the complex in Germany. They place markers and move the bombers. A few things to note here. These bombers can't do anything else this turn. So if the Russians were also attacking the land territory of Germany with other units, the bombers wouldn't be involved in that combat in any way. They wouldn't engage with any of the ground troops, including anti-aircraft artillery. They're only doing a bombing run and then finding a friendly place to land. Okay, here we go. The two bombers in Italy. The German player rolls 2 dice looking for a 1 to shoot down a bomber, and both miss. The Russian player rolls 2 dice to determine the damage, and they rolled a total of 8. This means that the complex in Italy will take its maximum of 6 points of damage. The other 2 points are not assigned. 1 down, 1 to go. On to Germany. The defender rolls 3 dice and 1 hit. The attacker removes a bomber. They roll 2 dice for the surviving bombers and get a total of 5. Not so great. The German player places a red chip under the complex to denote that it's taken 5 points of damage. The German player may choose to repair it on their turn. If they don't, the complex will only be able to build 5 units on its next turn. The Germans may choose to repair it during the purchased units phase of their turn. If they don't, the complex will only be able to build 5 units. On to non-combat. The bombers that hit Germany will continue north and land in the UK, and the others will head back to Caucasus. Pretty straightforward, right? In 2009, Axis and Allies Pacific introduced a rule around strategic bombing raids that was carried into 1942 Second Edition as an optional rule in 2012. The basics of this rule allow fighters to escort bombers on strategic bombing raids and for defending fighters to act as interceptors. Again, in 1942 Second Edition, this is an optional rule. Here's how it works. The attacker declares a strategic bombing raid on a complex, how many bombers and how many escort fighters are coming along. Assuming the territory has fighters that are in the same territory as the complex being bombed, the defenders may declare that the defending fighters are going to intercept the bombing raid. Something to know right away about bombers, escorts, and interceptors involved in any kind of strategic bombing raid. This is all they're going to do this turn. Any surviving attackers will end the combat phase in that territory, and then will have to find a friendly place to land during non-combat. The fighters assigned as interceptors can't help defend against an attack on the actual land territory, and they don't get to move. Except in the bizarre circumstance where a fighter is assigned as an interceptor and the land territory that it occupied was captured. In that 1 in a bazillion chance, that fighter has 1 move to find a friendly place to land. It can land on a carrier or it can land in a friendly land territory, but if it can't find a place to land, it's destroyed. Once the interceptors and escorts are declared, we move into a single round of air combat. First, the attacker rolls 1 die for each attacking fighter and bomber. For each 1 that they roll, the defender will immediately remove an interceptor. Any downed interceptors will not get to shoot back. The defender will then roll 1 die for each surviving interceptor. For each 2 or less that they roll, the attacker will remove an air unit. Any downed bombers in this phase will not get to fire on the complex. After this step, any escort fighters that remain are considered to have retreated. They're still in the territory, but they aren't part of any further combat. The interceptors are also removed from the combat. It's important to note here that fighters that are assigned as escorts are not subject to the defensive fire of an industrial complex or of any AA guns that might be in the territory. And escort fighters are never part of any land combat that might be going on in that territory. They're just part of the strategic bombing raid, and then they retreat. The defending player will roll 1 die for each bomber that's made it this far, and for every 1 that they roll, the attacker will remove 1 bomber from play. That bomber won't get to attack the complex. And as I said before, any surviving bombers will roll 1 die, total that roll, and that's the damage done to the complex. Let's go back to the example with the Russian bombers and see if we can sort this out. Okay, we're back with our stack of giant Russian bombers, but we've added 2 fighters in the Russian-controlled Ukraine, 2 fighters in Belarusia, and 2 more to the Caucasus. The Germans now have 2 fighters in Italy, and 4 in Germany. Time for the combat move. The Russians will send 2 bombers into Italy with 2 fighters as escorts, and 3 bombers to Germany with 2 fighters as escorts. The Germans decide to scramble all of their fighters to meet their strategic bombing raid. The Russians also decide to attack the land territory of Germany from Poland with a few land forces and 2 fighters. Moving into conduct combat. First, we have the strategic bombing raids. The attacker chooses to start in Italy. We have to handle the escort interceptor combat first. The attacker rolls 4 dice, 2 for the bombers, 2 for the fighters, looking for a 1, and they get 1 hit. The Germans remove 1 of the German interceptors. The remaining fighter fires looking for a 2 or less and a hit. The Russians remove 1 of the escorts. The surviving escort and interceptor are no longer in combat. The German complex fires and misses. The Russians roll 2 dice to determine the damage, and they get a total of 7. The Germans add chips under the complex in Italy to indicate that it's taken its maximum damage of 6. On to the attack in Germany. The Russians are after the industrial complex with 3 bombers and 2 fighters as escorts. The Germans have scrambled 4 fighters. We have to handle the bombing raid before any land or sea combat. Let's see what happens. The Russians roll 5 dice for the bombers and the escort fighters. 1 hit. The Germans are down to 3 fighters. They fire looking for a 2 or less and 3 hits. Wow. The Russians remove both fighters and 1 bomber. The complex now rolls its defensive shots, and they roll 2 dice. 1 more hit. Wow. Brutal for the Russians. The last surviving bomber rolls to see what damage it's done, and they get a 2. The Germans snicker as they place the 2 chips under the complex in Germany. We would now move on to land combat. It would proceed as normal, but it's important to remember that the German fighters that were assigned to interceptor duty will not be part of the combat, nor will that lone bomber. Note that the Russian fighters that are attacking Germany are subject to the defensive fire of the anti-aircraft artillery, but not from the complex. The assault on the land territory and the industrial complex are 2 separate things and are resolved as such. Speaking of AA guns, in Part 3 we're going to break down anti-aircraft artillery. We'll give you the basic stats and everything it can and can't do. When that's ready, it'll be right here. If you want to take a look at Part 1 of this series, here you go. If you need the entire How to Play for Axis and Allies, here's your link. And if you're ready to join Board Game Nation, click here to subscribe. My name is Gary Blevins, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.